also known as the Old Gazer, and this channel is all about beginning amateur astronomy. The goal of the channel is to provide some information, some practical advice, and hopefully a little bit of inspiration to newcomers to the hobby as a means of helping you sort of work your way through the learning curve associated with this really good hobby. So welcome, glad to have you, and let's just get started with this video. Today I'm going to start what will be probably either a 2 or 3 part series on taking photographs through your telescope. Now, you might wonder why I would want to do that, because if you've seen my previous videos, you will, of course, or perhaps remember that I have always advocated that beginners, rank beginners, inexperienced, those just beginning the hobby, need to learn the fundamentals first before you move on to more advanced aspects of amateur astronomy, of which astrophotography certainly is one. I've suggested that you need to spend your time learning the sky, learning where to find objects in the sky, learning how to operate your telescope, perfecting the art of viewing things through your telescope, and so forth. And I stand by that advice. That is still, I think, very sound advice for those who are just beginning this hobby, and I think that's just common sense. Learn the fundamentals first before you move forward with the more advanced aspects of the hobby. That said, I've been doing these videos for 2 or 3 months, I think now, and I think this is number 20 on the channel. And some of you who've been with me from the beginning probably have, become a little bit comfortable now with what you're doing, and you kind of know what you're doing, and you want to move forward from here. Others of you will soon reach that point. Some of you might already be at or beyond that point, even though my audience is presumed to be those who are new to the hobby. But also, for all of you who are relatively new, brand new or inexperienced, I must tell you that there is going to come a time, sooner probably than later, when you are going to want to start taking photographs of objects through your telescope. And in fact, now this is my own opinion here, which might not be shared by others, but in my view, you're going to need to learn how to take photographs through your telescope if you're going to enjoy this hobby and get the rewards and the satisfactions that go along with it. Now, here's why. Unless you live in a place that has dark skies, and unless you have a telescope that has a pretty good aperture in it, you're going to find it very frustrating, very disappointing to try to find and view deep sky objects. Finding and viewing the moon is no problem. Finding and viewing the planets is usually no problem. But when you start to try to look for and view deep sky objects, that's where the problem comes in, especially if you are in areas where there is considerable light pollution, and especially if you've got a small amateur telescope. Now, some of you may have had a different experience from mine, but let me tell you what my experience has been. I live in Bortle 5, a Bortle 5 zone, Bortle 5 skies, bordering on Bortle 6. So there is very significant light pollution here in the area where I view and practice my hobby. And I have an 8-inch telescope here, which has a good aperture. This telescope has the capability of gathering over 800 times more light than my unaided eye can gather. But even with that, when I try to find and view deep sky objects, other than, the bigger and brighter ones, such as perhaps the Orion Nebula and the Pleiades, when you kind of get beyond that, what I have found, again, my experience is that when I try to view deep sky objects, even with a good 8-inch telescope, I rarely, if ever, see anything except just a gray area in the field of view. It might look like a smudge, it might look like a wisp, it might look like just a cloudy area within the field of view. Normally, there's not any resolution of stars, or if so, just a few. It doesn't matter if I'm looking at nebulae or galaxies or star clusters. I can't really see much detail, and my attempts to just view these deep sky objects here in these Bortle 5-6 skies where I live is frustrating and at times very disappointing. And that's, I've read a lot of anecdotal accounts and heard some things about people who have left the hobby because once they get a telescope and then they've looked at the moon and they've looked at the planets and maybe they've looked at the Orion Nebula and the Pleiades, and then they start trying to look for these fainter objects, and they find those views to be disappointing and frustrating because you really can't see much detail. I have found that to be the case here in my area using my 8-inch telescope. And so, you know, some people have actually moved away from the hobby because they get to that point and they realize they're not going to be able to see a lot of things, a lot of deep sky objects, and they've seen beautiful pictures of all these things and they want to see those things, and they try to see them and they can't because of light pollution and or not enough aperture or whatever combination of events makes that problematic. So that's been my experience. Now, what is the solution to that? If you're going to remain interested in the hobby, most of you are going to want to get into viewing, being able to look at and being, inspired by and educated by all these deep sky objects, and you need to be able to see them in order to do that. You need to be able to see a little bit of detail, a little bit of color, a little bit of those kinds of things. You need to be able to see something over and above what you're going to be able to see just with your unaided eye through an eyepiece connected to your telescope. The best solution to that, of course, is to find dark skies. Dark skies make a really big difference. The darker the skies, the more things you're going to be able to see, and the better you're going to be able to see them. Now, unfortunately, of course, that's not very practical for most of us. Many of us, perhaps the majority of people watching this video, and I'll include myself in that, we don't live in dark skies, and we can only visit dark skies occasionally, infrequently, if you will. It's just not practical to go out every time we want to have a viewing session to a dark sky location and set up and do that, because often those are some distance away. In my case, the nearest, so-called dark skies is, an hour and a half away. It's a 3-hour round trip. And I can't go there very often because, there's life to live. And I can't spend all of my time camping out up there at that dark sky location. But if you're in dark skies, this is not nearly the issue as it is for the rest of us. If you can regularly get to dark skies, then you might be satisfied with remaining a visual astronomer and just going out to these dark skies as you can and viewing. But for most of us, that's really not a realistic option. We're going to be doing most of our viewing from our backyards or our driveways or our apartment balconies or wherever it is, and going to have to deal with whatever level of light pollution exists in our area. And that's going to prevent you from getting good, satisfying, detailed images of deep sky objects as a general rule. So if you can't go to dark skies, what are you to do? Well, I have found the solution that works for me, and the thing that's kept me really interested in the hobby and kept me going. The answer for me is that I have learned to take photographs, long exposure photographs of these deep sky objects through my telescope. If you can take a long exposure photograph and leave that shutter open and gather as much light as you can, let as much of that come through and register on the sensor of your camera, then you're going to collect a lot more detail and you're going to be able to see a much more satisfying, pleasing, interesting image than just trying to look at it with your eye alone through the eyepiece. So that's what motivated me to get involved with taking photographs through my telescope. And I think something like that probably is going to to be in your future if you're going to stay really interested in the hobby or have an opportunity to see a lot of things in the night sky and see them well enough that it won't be frustrating or disappointing. So that's why I want to talk about in a series of 2 or 3 videos here about taking photographs through a telescope, because that's the best way to gather enough signal to give you a good, pleasing, satisfying image of these great, wonderful, beautiful things that are out there in the night sky. Okay. Now, if you've got a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of technical savvy and know-how, or a desire to gain the appropriate technical savvy and know-how, you might choose to become a serious or advanced astrophotographer. You can spend many thousands of dollars on gear to do that. And, you know, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of patience, maybe a little bit of an artistic sense. If you want to go that route, you certainly can. If you've got the money, the time, the inclination, and you'll probably be able to eventually produce some beautiful pictures of deep sky objects. At the other end of the spectrum, you can, of course, take some pictures through the eyepiece of your telescope using your smartphone or your cell phone camera. You can just hold the lens of the camera up to the eyepiece of the telescope, take a picture that way. You can get one of these adapters that clamps onto your eyepiece, and there's a little slot in there to hang your cell phone in, and you line it up with the eyepiece and you take pictures that way. Now, the thing is, though, you can take some decent pictures of the moon and perhaps the planets doing that. You won't be able to get very good images of deep sky objects, however, because you're going to need longer exposures than are allowed by the cameras in most cell phones today, although I understand that this is rapidly changing. The technology is changing. You can get cell phones now that do have the capability of doing long exposures. You can get apps for your cell phone that will enable you to take long exposure photographs. So things are evolving so that the cell phones, smartphones, are probably sooner than later going to become a very real part of astrophotography, taking pictures of the night sky. But right now, I don't think we're quite there yet. You can get some images of deep sky objects given the right camera and the right circumstances, but still not the kind of images that you want to see to recognize them as a satisfying and non-disappointing image. I'm not going to get into that. I've never taken any pictures with my smartphone, so obviously it would be disingenuous of me to think I could tell you how to do that. In the description part of today's video, I'm giving you the name of a Facebook group, which is a group of people that are avidly involved in taking pictures of the night sky through their cell phones, and you can see many, many examples of pictures that have been taken there and see quite a bit of discussion that goes on back and forth. So if you're interested in that, or maybe that's the way you want to get started in astrophotography, I would refer you to other sources that can better instruct you, and perhaps especially to that Facebook group, which has a lot of good pictures, a lot of good information there. There's one other option, by the way. You can take pictures through your telescope using what I call astro cameras. Now, I'm not sure if that's a legitimate term or not, but I'm referring to cameras that are made specifically for astronomy. They fit right into to your telescope. They have connections that connect up to a laptop, which has software on it that controls the camera, and you view the images on the monitor of the laptop, the screen of the laptop, while you're doing it. These cameras are fairly simple all the way up to tremendously complex. The price points start from fairly cheap all the way up to, well, very expensive. And most serious astrophotographers use those kinds of cameras to take their pictures of deep sky objects. I've never done that either. Just not the money or the inclination to do that. And so I can't speak to you about that, and I will have to refer you to other sources, other YouTube videos perhaps, or other sources of information if you're interested in learning more about those kinds of cameras and maybe getting one and starting to use it. I've seen a lot of pictures that have been produced using cameras like that, and many of them are just really, really good. So you can go that route. I haven't gone that route. So I don't use my cell phone. I'm not an advanced astrophotography. I don't use these astro cameras. So what do I use? Well, of course, I use my trusty DSLR camera. And that's what these videos are going to be about. Taking pictures through your telescope using a DSLR camera. That's the only way I've ever done it. It's worked for me. That's what I know about, and so that's what I'm going to talk to you about. If you want to use your cell phone or an astro camera, and if you want to become much more advanced than what we're going to talk about here, then look elsewhere and you can find all the information and guidance, I'm sure, that you could ever possibly need in order to do that. But we're going to be talking about, in these videos, taking pictures through a telescope using a DSLR camera. Now, talk about the camera for a minute. This is a DSLR camera. Many of you probably have one of these or have access to one that you could borrow or whatever for a while. If you don't have one and would like to have one, you don't have to break the bank to get one of these. Now, I bought this one new about a dozen years ago. It was $699 at Costco. And it came with 2 lenses, numerous accessories, a nice carry bag, and the camera body itself. And so that's what I paid. It's a modest camera. It's not a top-of-the-line professional DSLR by any means. Very modest, inexpensive camera. You can still buy cameras similar to this, new, with 1 or 2 lenses for, I don't know, maybe $500 more or less today. Or you can go the used route, which is a viable option. You can buy used DSLRs from reputable companies that sell photographic equipment, and you can get a camera body only like this. That is without any lenses, and the camera body is all you need when you take pictures through a telescope. You can buy a DSLR camera body like this used with a pretty low shutter count, and said to be in good to excellent condition for maybe $150 or so. So not too bad. If you don't have one, you can beg, borrow still, or buy one, I suppose. Okay. I want to not go too far with this video. Don't like to cause people to get bored and tune out. So I want to discuss just one very elementary thing in this video, and then we'll move a little deeper into this topic in future videos. Today, I just want to show you the very simple process of attaching a DSLR camera to a telescope, okay? Now, in order to do that, you will need 2 pieces of equipment. Fortunately, these are inexpensive and won't cost very much at all. They will be necessary in order for you to connect your camera to your telescope. I'm going to use this little refracting telescope as my prop here as we go through this, as I show you these things. You will need 2 pieces of equipment. One of these is called a T-adapter, which looks in most cases about like this, or in the case of some other telescopes, such as this Schmidt-Cassegrainian telescope back here, it might look like this, but a T-adapter. A T-adapter is the device that connects to the telescope, and it simply fits in where the eyepiece would normally go, and you can lock it in, and now you have the T-adapter attached to the telescope. Now, the other piece of gear that you will need is something called a T-ring, and it will look something like this. Now, please understand here and don't forget that T-rings are brand specific. Some of them work with Canon cameras, some work with Nikon cameras, and so forth. When you get one of these, you have to make sure that it's going to work with the particular brand of camera that you have. Okay, you have to keep that in mind. The T-ring is the device that attaches to the camera. And it just fits in like the lens would in your camera by just, attaching it just as you would one of the lenses for the camera and locking it into place. So now you have the T-ring attached to the camera. The T-ring then attaches to the T-adapter. They just simply screw together like this. And then you put the T adapter in the end of the telescope and screw them together, lock them down like that, and there you have it. Your DSLR camera attached to your telescope. And that's all that's involved, a very easy process requiring those two pieces of equipment, T adapter and T ring, and with it connected in that fashion, now you're ready to go. That, by the way, will enable you to do something called prime focus photography, which simply means that you're basically using your telescope as a big lens attached to your camera. And that's how you would take pictures in that way. There is another way to take pictures using a DSLR with a telescope, and that is called eyepiece projection photography, in which you're taking pictures directly through the eyepiece of a telescope. Now, in order to do that, of course, you'll have to have some means of attaching your camera to the eyepiece. And what you have to do, or what you can do, is you look for eyepieces that are threaded at the top to accept the threads of a T-ring. Now, I happen to have two eyepieces that are threaded to accept T-rings. I have this Bader Hyperion 24 millimeter eyepiece with a 68-degree field of view. If you remove the rubber eye cup, it's threaded there, and you just screw the T-ring right onto the eyepiece. And then, of course, the other end of the T-ring is connected to the camera, so you have very solidly connected your camera to the eyepiece of your telescope, and you can then take photographs right through the eyepiece. Eyepiece projection photography. There are other eyepieces that are threaded at the top in that same fashion, such as this zoom eyepiece that I have here, threaded right at the top, once again to accept a T-ring, like that. The other end attached to the camera, and you have a connection there. You can take pictures using your camera through this zoom eyepiece. Okay, I also have a Barlow lens here, a 2x Barlow lens, which is also threaded at the top to accept a T-ring. So I could use this Barlow lens to take pictures at 2 times normal magnification as well. So that's basically all there is to it. You use to do prime focus photography, you use a T adapter and a T ring to connect your camera to the telescope, and you're ready to go. If you want to do eyepiece projection photography, you attach the key ring to a threaded eyepiece, and the camera is attached to the other end of the T ring. Once again, you're ready to go, and you can do eyepiece projection photography. Please keep in mind and remember that not all eyepieces are threaded like that to accept a T-ring. You'll have to, if you want eyepieces like that, you'll have to make sure when you're reading the description or shopping for them that it says in the specifications or elsewhere in the description that they are threaded at the top like that to accept a T-ring. Let me briefly mention one other thing here that concerns attaching your camera to your telescope. When I first tried to attach a camera to this telescope, and this is the first telescope that I ever tried to attach a camera to, I was very frustrated because I was not able to bring anything into focus. When I had that camera attached to the telescope, no matter how much I moved that focus knob, I could take it all the way to the extremes, to the stops either way, could not get focus. Well, after a little research, I discovered that I didn't have enough focus space. And that's defined basically as the distance from the end of your telescope tube here to the sensor in your camera. That's called focus space, and I think pretty much in most cases that needs to be about 55 millimeters, and most T-rings are built with that in mind. Most camera sensors are less than 55 millimeters from the end of the telescope without the T-ring. You put the T-ring on there and connect everything up, and you've got that 55 millimeters or very close to it, so close that it wouldn't make any difference. So In this case, I didn't have that 55 millimeters. I needed more space in there. And when that happens, you have to use something called an extension ring. An extension ring is just a hollow tube that fits into the end of your telescope or somewhere in the path of the optics of your telescope. And then the camera will attach to that, into that extension ring, and that will give you the extra distance that you need in order to obtain focus. These extension tubes are common. You can buy them at any place that sells telescope equipment, online or retail. Very inexpensive. They come in all sizes, and you can find out if you've got a focus problem, that might be what you need, and just see if an extension ring tube will solve that problem for you. Now, in my case, I happen to have this Barlow lens, which allows you to remove the lens from it, like this. The lens is right here in the bottom. You can screw that lens out, and what you're left with is just a hollow tube. And I discovered that by putting that hollow tube, that hollow Barlow lens in my telescope, and then attaching the T-adapter to that, and then the camera with the T-ring on it to that, that gave me the extra distance that I needed to get proper back focus, and then I was able to get focus without any problem. So if you're having trouble focusing with your camera attached to your telescope, it may be because you don't have the required backspace, and you may need to get and attach an extension tube, or maybe improvise a little bit like I did and try out a Barlow lens with the lens removed and see if that does the job. But most commonly, if you can't achieve focus with the camera attached to your telescope, that's the reason, and you'll need to lengthen things out a little bit by adding an extension tube into the path, and then you should be set and ready to go. I'm going to stop there for today. I just wanted to, before you can take pictures with a camera through a telescope, you've got to have your camera attached to the telescope. And that's basically information that shows you how to do that. And I think that's enough for today. We'll wrap this one up. Now that we've got our telescope connected to our camera, in the next video, we'll move ahead and start talking a little bit about exactly how it is that you take photographs through that camera that is now attached to your telescope. So we'll take that up next time. Until then, thanks so very much for watching. And as always, I'll conclude by wishing all of you clear skies and good viewing.